Today, I'm delighted to welcome James Orchard. James is the CEO of QBE Ventures and the chair of Insurtech Australia. James leads the charge in investing in accelerating innovative solutions that align with QBE's strategic priorities. With a career spanning leadership roles at major organisations like IAG and QBE and Wesfarmers, James has a proven track record of driving innovation and strategic growth. His expertise in venture capital, corporate innovation, and strategic partnerships positions him at the forefront of shaping the future of insurtech, insurance, and beyond. I was lucky enough to work with James for a number of years as we transformed the future of Australia's largest insurer. Today, we're going to unpack James's thoughts on all things innovation and the future of insurance. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to see you. Thanks for joining. So we'll get straight into it and keen to unlock your thoughts and experiences on the secrets to innovation. So what do you believe are the key ingredients that can help complex organisations innovate effectively?
This is actually quite a timely question. We've been thinking about this a lot within QBE Ventures. We've been quite lucky in the sense we've had some relatively strong early success, and I think that's now we're starting to think about how we can help the rest of QBE and the rest of the organisation think through how they innovate. And so, it's given us a good chance to, I guess, consolidate some of our learnings and how we might be able to apply that to the rest of the business. So, look, I'm going to warn you, mate, I've got 5 of these, right? And they're probably due a podcast in itself, and you probably only wanted 2, but I'm going to go deep here.
5's good.
So please let's cut me off if you need to. But yes, there's 5, and I think they're really more centered around, or probably more relevant to those folks who are really setting off on this journey, or probably pivoting on this journey, as opposed to sort of the veterans who know a lot already. So the first and foremost factor that we sort of have really learned from is that innovation it needs to play a clear strategic role in the organization, and it needs to be very deliberate. So we've seen, or I've certainly spoken to loads of folks who companies have concluded that they want to innovate, but start simply by tinkering, right, or taking a very sort of hobbyist approach to how they start to innovate. And I think where we've seen companies be most effective is where innovation plays a really clear role in the corporate strategy and has really clear outcomes that are well accepted and endorsed across the group. And everyone is aligned behind that, and everyone has a clear view on what success looks like. It doesn't need to be sort of described to the infinite detail, but it's clear. And I find if you have that role, and the team or teams who are running with innovation projects or establishing innovation capability have that, it supports everything from sort of top down, reinforcement, the air cover needed, but all the way to sort of, I guess, securing the resource and everything that you need to be able to sort of move forward. So that's the first one.
I might just jump in there.
Go for it.
You probably saw me nodding 1,000 times while you were saying that. It's funny you mentioned that because the amount of people I talk to, and I use QBE Ventures as an example. It's the first example I always give about a successful innovation capability within a large organization. And that is, I think, one thing that you have been very deliberate about is you've got a really clear mandate that is obviously aligned to your company strategy, and you are there to solve problems, I think, first and foremost for the business, but it's to bring outside in to do that. And I think it was funny you mentioned that, because you are the number one example I give every time I talk to anyone in the innovation space. I say, there's a few companies that I think are doing it well in Australia in particular, and QBE Ventures is certainly one of those.
Oh, that's great to hear. Actually, I didn't realize that. So thank you for that. But you're right, and I think it's something I actually learned from my boss and from the group CEO here, that I think if you can be very deliberate, if you think of it as something that's very strategic and plays a definitive role in how the organization moves forward, then it helps with absolutely every component of the process. So the second one, and it's somewhat related, probably more to the how. When you're thinking about the role innovation plays and how you're going to set yourself up, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is is however you set yourself up, it needs to be nuanced to the organization you're working within, right? It's very difficult to take a cookie cutter approach and adopt something that may work well in another company, or something that a consultants have said that has worked great at, say, Google or Apple or even another insurance company, and immediately assume it's going to be successful in your own organization, right? I think one of the things that we found is you need to develop an intimate understanding of how your organization works. As I said, it's nuances, and that's everything from sort of the digital maturity, the cultural aspects of the organization, how decisions are made, dare I say, sort of politics and any sort of tensions within the organization, how things are funded, all these sorts of things that go into how you sort of, I guess, design the most effective innovation capability. And I think too many people just adopt something that they know has worked in another organization, just make that assumption that it can work with them, and it clearly doesn't, right? Firemark Labs is a good example. What we helped sort of developed at IAG would not work within QBE at the moment. It might do in the future, but currently, in terms of the role that we need to play and the problems that we need to solve for, that wouldn't be fit for purpose.
Yeah. So again, a really good point. I think naively, when I left Firemark Labs from IAG, went to another organisation and was very keen. They had a reasonably immature innovation capability. Was very excited to make an impact and take what we had learnt very, very quickly. Exactly those things you've mentioned, things around culture, digital maturity, all of those things are actually far more important than just lifting and shifting. It doesn't work. You've got to adapt to the environment. So it's a really poignant point.
And I think the third piece again sort of relates to this sort of this concept of one size fits all, but this is probably the biggest messaging we've been driving internally within QBE recently, and that is innovation needs to have, or to be successful, to successfully innovate, you need to have what we refer to sort of as an innovation system, right? So by system, I don't mean technology. I mean a set of pathways, a set of processes where people can take, no matter how big, whether it's just a small sort of entrepreneurship type approach or whether it's a new venture build, whatever that might be, everything in between. You need to have clear pathways for how you move something from idea through to experimentation, build, launch, and scale. And I think one of the things we found quite early at QBE is because we tend to focus on large technology projects, we tend to build things, because we are a large, multinational, regulated company. The processes that support large technology projects aren't conducive to supporting experimentation, but we didn't have that pathway for experimentation and for innovation. And so one of the things we really focused on quite quickly was sort of saying, okay, what are the bits and pieces, what are the processes that we really need to optimize to allow us to innovate more rapidly? And so a good example of that could be things something like procurement, right? Or how we share data, right? Where we can't go through the same process that we might go through as an organization for a $100 million cloud migration. That can't have the same process for a 2-month proof of concept for 20 grand, right? And so you need to build those fit for purpose processes. And that's everything from how you fund it, how you resource it, as I said, how you onboard, how you sort of, define success and sort of move beyond experimentation and back into the core business. So I think the more you can clarify there, the more you can recognize that it does need its own discrete set of pathways and champion them. Then I think you've got every chance of being successful. And if people are aware of what those pathways are, then they feel much more empowered to get on with it. It becomes less of a chore, it becomes less onerous, right? And you sort of have this, I guess, this circle that sort of then is self-fulfilling. So that's the third one. So keep up with me here. The fourth one is discipline, right? You've got to maintain discipline. And if you have a look at the organizations globally who are generally regarded as being very innovative, in and out of tech, they have a tremendous ability to say no to stuff. They have a tremendous ability to sort of be really rigorous around what they look at and what they don't. and very much stay true to that role I was saying before, and the value that they're adding in strategic alignment back to the organization. I think when you're starting off in an innovation capability, or even if you're mature and there's a new technology like we've seen with the advent of generative AI over the course of the last couple of years, it's very easy to get drawn into theater, right? It's very easy to get drawn into hype and get carried away with the art of the possible. But I think those capabilities that have done really, really well have managed to maintain that discipline, right? They managed to be crystal clear on what they're looking at and what they're not. And if something's not working, they kill it, they understand why, they learn from it, and they move on, right? And you don't just sort of stretch these projects out. So I think, really, really maintain discipline. And I guess as part of that, don't feel that you need to, chase the unicorn on day one, right? So as part of that discipline, recognize that time is your ally, and that and you can start small and add value, right? And as long as you keep that discipline, as long as you avoid that hype, then I think you can be very successful. So that's the fourth one. The fifth one for me, and this was something that I thought through on reflection, is something that I think we did at IAG as well, was you've really got to develop trust throughout the organization, right? I think innovation is all about collaboration. And if you're playing a clear role in the organization to help progress that organization, then you're going to need the support of key stakeholders from across the business. And if they're going to give you that support, that you need to get their trust. And so that isn't about walking into the room and saying, well, hey, you know what, I know you've been doing your job for 20 years, but you don't really know what you're doing. Here's a new technology that's going to do that for you, right? That's just you're not going to win any friends. You're not going to win that trust, and you're not going to get anywhere. And so we've been really adamant as we've built the team to recruit folks who have a tremendous amount of EQ, who understand that the role that we're playing in the organization is to provide a service, right? It is to help the organization accelerate its strategic priorities, and that is only going to be achieved through collaboration. And so, we've got some tremendous talent in the team, but first and foremost, they go in to listen. They go in to ask questions, to be curious, to truly understand where they can help, and ultimately, I think, to help cultivate that growth mindset across the organization. So I think as you're building your teams up, as you're thinking about who can work in innovation, be conscious that to be successful, you have to develop trust. And I think to develop that trust over time, you need to have the right talent and the right people who understand the role they play, and can take that on. I think that's really, really important.
That's really good. I think it's interesting you talk about the talent perspective and the types of people. You're very deliberate with the types of people you look to bring into your team, and it's not just about technical skills, but it sounds like that EQ, that curiosity, that ability to listen, that collaborative mindset is equally, if not more important than the technical skills that come with being an innovation guru, because like you say, your lift and shift doesn't necessarily work. I think it's really good. And actually, I would say a student of James Orchard back in the day is skills can be taught with people with the right mindset. Completely. and but it's very difficult to teach some of those softer skills that do take people into the right room, put them in front of the right people to ask the right questions, listen, and genuinely understand and collaborate. So very good. Well, that's 5 fantastic ingredients there. So if we flip that, and if that's the kind of the ingredients to a successful innovation capability, where is it all going wrong? So what are the things that are getting in the way, and why is not everyone innovating as effectively as they could be? Yeah,
that's really sort of reflecting on that question. I think if I was to summarize it up front, and then I'm going to have to explain myself a little bit. I think the biggest barrier to innovation is a fixed mindset, right? So an unwillingness to learn, a fear of failure. And I think, we've come across all forms of, I guess, resistance or blockers, as you frame them. Everything from, we just don't have the funding for this. And this is at every stage, by the way, too. This is at ideation stage at the beginning, but also when you've proven it, the business model, the opportunity has successfully passed experimentation phases or MVP, and you're out there scaling it now. It's you can still come up against these same challenges. So things like around funding, things like management bandwidth, very much entrenched with sort of an incumbent partner or a legacy partner, all sorts of excuses. But for me, it's almost that they're tangible demonstrations of that fixed mindset, right? Of that fear of failure, of not wanting to take that risk, and I think it's actually tremendously restrictive, that even if you've got a lot of top-down support, even if you have all those ingredients that I sort of mentioned before, and you've got the upper echelons of an organization clearly championing and trying to incentivize innovation, it can sometimes still be really difficult when you come up against a stakeholder or a series of stakeholders who just find it really difficult to sort of think outside of that mindset. And so where we have had success in the group, and we did this, very early on, it sort of comes back to this sort of building trust piece, is there were clearly a number of champions within the organization, within QBE, who not only had great appetite for innovation and working knowledge of how to innovate, but they were key decision makers, and they would approach anything, from the perspective of wanting to learn, for being comfortable taking risks, comfortable to fail and get it wrong, right, and learn through that process. And I think, to your point earlier around teaching people, I think if you can start small, if you can start to collaborate effectively by building that trust, then, once you've got a couple of wins within the organization, and a lot of that, as I said, has been championed through those people who already have the right mindset, then you start to get you start to be able to sort of more tangibly demonstrate what success looks like. You start to build that rapport, that relationship, and over time you can start to work with those people, and they do shift, right? They do start to transition away from that, or transition towards having much more of a growth mindset. And I think that's something that we can certainly be super proud of. I know in a number of parts of our organization that we're doing projects now, or have completed projects now, or partnerships now, where 2 years ago I would never even have asked the question, right? But through those ingredients I mentioned before, through really, really strong leadership in those parts of the business, through new people coming on and new team members at all levels coming on, we've been able to sort of start small, build that reputation up now, where we've got a subset of leaders who are just innovation champions and big stakeholders, and wanting to do more and more. So I think that would be the biggest blocker. So the more you can do to overcome that, and recognizing that it takes time, the better.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, and I've sort of, I guess, been a part of and witnessed countless examples where, and whether it started with that fixed mindset, it's probably a combination of things that have kind of fallen over. But the outcome was that there was no quick wins, so there was no runs on the board. So you kind of had eroded trust. You had, I guess, funders of innovation capabilities saying, "What are we getting? We're spending all this money. We're not necessarily getting anything in return," and that doesn't necessarily mean dollars, not even an uplift in capability or culture or whatever it might be, or mindset. And again, this is probably where I use the example of QBE Ventures of you are now a long-standing innovation capability in an environment where many of those capabilities don't exist in large organizations. Certainly in the last couple of years, where there has been, we've sort of moved into a cost-constrained and productivity-focused environment rather than a growth environment. That is, I think, your ability to generate some of those early wins and build that trust within the organization, along with all of those factors that you mentioned around, deliberate, aligned to corporate strategy, are some of the reasons why you're here and able to do some of those things that 2 years ago you never, like you said, you never would have considered.
Yeah, I agree, and I think one of the beauties of I found working with QBE is we've managed to avoid, I think, some of those barriers, because we are such a large organization, multinational organization. We work in most of the primary P&C markets, insurance and reinsurance markets globally. there's always an area of our business that is, wanting to innovate, whether that's through growth, whether there's, whether it is more an efficiency play, whatever that is, there's always parts of the business that are already doing it. And so we're less sort of subject, I guess, to the various cycles, where perhaps locally we might have gone through, where there is probably more of a cost focus at times. Whereas the UK markets are growing and London Lloyd's markets are growing, or have been growing in recent years at a tremendous pace, right? And that has led to significant opportunities around, whether it's algorithmic underwriting, digital trading, all these sorts of things that are now coming through. If that, as rates slow, if that environment changes, then you can then start to have a look at maybe North America or reinsurance or wherever that might be. So that is one of the things where we've been quite lucky, where we've been able to sort of, I guess, keep growing that track record, if you like, and then engagement with the business, because we do have such, I guess, a large footprint globally.
Yeah, that's true. That is a unique capability against some of your other major peers in Oz, I guess, is that having risk across different parts of the globe also means you're not just exposed to different insurance risks, but also different economic cycles and whatnot. So you can. There's always room for innovation in terms of growth somewhere probably in your portfolio, but also room for innovation around productivity and efficiency in other parts of the business. Yeah, so that's a really good reflection on I guess one of the things that's helped you be so successful. We might move on to innovation challenges, which is somewhat related, but I'm keen to unpack an example where you've had a specific effort or investment or pursuit that didn't achieve the expected outcome. And that, I guess I'm keen to understand. You've talked a lot about acceptance of failure, being willing to learn, having the right mindset. I'm keen to understand the outcomes of because I'm sure there would be an example somewhere where you didn't have the expected outcome from when you first either made the investment or developed the proposition, whatever it might be. But it doesn't mean that's necessarily a failure.
Yeah, completely. Look, we've been quite lucky to date, where I don't think we haven't really had a project which has sort of started and then failed per se. We've certainly had a couple of projects where we probably had to pivot or iterate on a few more times than we had thought, right? And the best example I can probably draw on that is a local example. About sort of 2 years ago, we probably started one of our, I guess, more sort of adventurous projects with the AusPac team here, in the sense of really looking at a bigger problem that we felt we couldn't necessarily solve simply by investing or partnering with a startup, right? It was clear that to look at this challenge, we needed to probably have more of a build component to it. And so we work closely with our AusPac team to sort of ideate around how we can better serve sort of digital channels, particularly embedded insurance, right? Because that was sort of starting to gain a bit of traction, particularly in overseas markets in Asia and various European markets and products. And we are still very much of the view that in the longer term, it's going to be sort of a key growth channel for QBE locally. But what we recognized was that with the infrastructure we had at the moment, even with sort of the broader modernization agenda, we weren't going to be able to sort of service that or be able to access that channel in the short to medium term. And so what that meant was that if we wanted to do that, we were going to have to, as I said, build something new. And so we managed to set the project up as almost like a bit of a carve out from the core change program within the divisions here. We got all the necessary support and funding that we needed, and we were able to recruit a specialist team, from outside of, I guess, the core sort of resource pool. We managed to sort of, I guess, bring in an incremental team for that, almost akin to like a venture build, right? And the team had some great early success. And as we were going through it, sort of, we realized we sort of had to increase the scope slightly as we realized that to be able to take something to market, we probably needed an additional integration or a different capability, etc. And so over time, what was happening was, and we didn't sort of, certainly I didn't, I wasn't as close to it at the time, but what we realized was that we weren't quite gold plating it, but we were sort of, the concept of MVP had blown out more and more and more to something that was, probably much more robust than it needed to be, was probably a bit more gold plated than it needed to be. And for a number of reasons. And so the lady who was running that did an absolutely fantastic job in the sense, we need to call this, let's bring this up to the steer curve, which, I was sitting on alongside the exec. And so it was really brave in the sense of bringing that forward and saying, hey, look, we've got to the point now where we're behind schedule. It's not hitting where we need it to hit. And, we need to make a call now because the rest of the organization, as you said, is under it's resource constrained, right? So we need to understand, is there a trade-off that we need to make here? And if I was entirely honest, we were going into that meeting with a point of view that the executive would take the easy route out, right? That it would be, maybe we pause this. Maybe we sort of have a look where we might be able to deploy the resource in short term to solve other priorities and we move away from it. And even though the business case was still valid, even though the opportunity in the long run was key, and even though it was going to add tremendous value, I was my gut was telling me that was going to be the easy way out. And what was amazing is when we had the steerco, we had the chief underwriter for the division and a couple of other folks really sort of understand the problem, really be curious around why it was hitting delays, understanding what was required and what was not required, and then really leaning into or championing a pivot away from the path that we're on to a path that was going to still deliver the outcomes of the project in a much more efficient way. And what that meant was we sort of went in there, we reconsidered what MVP was, we really narrowed the focus down, we went back to basics. And I just thought that was a tremendous example of sort of that mindset piece that I was talking about before. Right, where I think if we had done this as an organization 3 or 4 years ago, we might have just killed it. But this time we really leant in, and it was a good example of not failing for the sake of failing, right? It was recognizing that, no, all of the metrics are still pointing towards a successful outcome here. Let's keep going, and we just need to change tact. And to have, the senior exec lean into that was fantastic. The team got what they needed, and we're in soft launch at the moment, and it'll go bigger in the first quarter of this year. So that's a really, really good example that then that division can lean on to be able to demonstrate, what we can innovate here, and it's a big piece. And innovation plays a really key role in our broader technology strategy. And yeah, we want to do more of that. And so how can we take these learnings and keep doing more? So yeah, I thought that was a good story.
Yeah, what a great example, a wonderful story where in many organizations it could have gone a different way. I think something that there's 3 things that stood out from that story for me was obviously bravery, which you mentioned. Like it can be overwhelming for someone leading an initiative, especially inside a complex organization. There are so many stakeholders, right? And everyone's got their own opinions on where it should go, what scope should include, what it shouldn't include, what you need to consider, all these kind of things. 2 is curiosity. You had your advisory board or your steerco providing that, really being curious and not necessarily driving to a conclusion of let's just shut this thing down because it's been a failure, a failure in inverted commas. But I think something that also really stood out was, and it comes back to one of your ingredients around discipline, is you actually sounds like you had some really strong governance in place as well around, which I think links to that discipline of successful the success of innovation is having really strong, good governance in that just having that steerco, and that steerco who meets regularly or semi-regularly or whatever it is, and goes in with a view of not just ticking a box or saying, yes, we approve the extension, or yes, no, we shut this down, is probably not as as widely utilized as many may think.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a myth too that the words innovation and governance can't go together. I think that it does come back to that discipline point, like you said, and I think it just needs to be without sounding cliched, it just needs to be fit for purpose, right? But you need to make sure that there is that discipline, and that would sometimes need a level of governance that reflects the investment made and the importance of the project. Right. Even if it is deemed innovative, even if it is experimental, You need to have that in place. It just creates the right clarity and the right support. And by doing that, it made the senior executive stay across the project and made them endorse the project. They championed the project, and when they were asked about it or when they needed to talk about it, they can do that. And I do think that's really important as part of our discipline piece.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good example. Thank you for sharing. I think something that comes up quite often with innovation is obviously you talk about project blowouts and time is money and these things, which is exactly highlighted in that example you've just given.
Mm.
I'm having conversations with a lot of leaders at the moment, and one of the strong themes coming through is the economic environment that we're in, particularly in Australia, around productivity, cost out. There's a lot of uncertainty around the cost of living squeeze. Consumers aren't spending, so businesses are sort of retracting on some of their discretionary expenditure. I'm keen to get your opinion and your thoughts on this, given there is a push for affordable innovation, because there is still certainly an appetite within a lot of organisations to innovate, and that could be innovate for efficiency or innovate for growth or whatever the brief is. How do you believe that leaders can deliver impactful innovation without having to break the bank in this particular cost-constrained environments? Yeah,
that's and I'd be lying if I said we didn't come across that challenge as well, right? As I said before, it's, sometimes it is a demonstration of a fixed mindset. Other times it literally just is no, there is nothing we can do, about that. And so as part of that system piece I was talking about before, I think funding is a key element of that. And one of the things that we've tried to do is I find that if you can create, particularly pre-scale, right? So right up to MVP. If you that whole experimentation elements, the early stages of an innovation project, if you can design a process that isn't onerous, that isn't expensive, I think the way you have to sort of probably focus more on the outside in, right, as opposed to building. And if you can, and as a result of having that efficiency, you can then do things cheaper, right, and even fund it yourself. So when I say that, I mean Ventures comes to work with a division. We say, you've got this problem. We think we can fix it. What do you think? The question that comes back after we've agreed that it's a great idea is, I can't afford it. Then how can we take some of that pressure away by saying, well, actually, A, it's not expensive, and B, we've got a little piece here out of our pot that we might be able to at least progress to proof of concept, and through that or piloting. And so through that, you can then start to build up tangible examples that can then feed into the business case and sort of down the track. So I think as part of that system piece, we really have a look at, okay, what are those pain points? What are those blockers? And in some area, in some areas, how can we remove that pain, and how can we do that? So I think that's one thing we really try and do. And because we try and bring best practice, we bring sort of repeatable process, a set of expertise, you can often do it cheaper than if the business who might not have any experience in this space do it themselves, or try and push you through a very sort of traditional process, right? So we definitely think there's something there. But also then, so assuming you get through that, one of the things we've been looking at as we think about bigger projects, like that project I mentioned before, or, as we've got a good idea and we want to scale it, no matter how much money you have, whether you're in a cost constraint, whether you're in a cost reduction environment or not, you're always going to be capital constrained, right? Or particularly OPEX. And so one of the things we've started thinking about is, as we're looking at bigger bets, how can we better utilize the balance sheet to do this? So, for example, we might partner with a company, might want to create something new. We've gone through the relevant processes. We realize actually there's a strong business case here. Now, then one channel to market might be, okay, we consume the service and, we pay X millions of dollars a year, or we build something new and again, it costs X million dollars a year. But there might also be opportunities where actually, why don't we create a joint venture? Why don't we create some sort of unique corporate vehicle or a corporate construct? Maybe we make an investment and receive something in return from the balance sheet, like an equity investment. Perhaps there's alternative third-party capital who might want to come in and support from a risk capital perspective or insurance capacity perspective. So there's various things that we can start to have a look at, which, okay, it means you're potentially giving a little bit of ownership away in the end product, But at the end of the day, you're going to be able to build it potentially cheaper than if you did it by yourself, probably faster. And by partnering with the right people, you can probably access what you need that you don't have already inside. So whether that's technology resource, whether that's IP, whether that's just bums on seats, whatever that might be, right? Risk capital. And so we're starting to think now a little bit bigger to say, okay, we can do this ourselves and it can be X. But you know what, if we just own 20 or 30% of it with a right in the future to buy it back, and we partner with X, and then it could be 5X, right? Or 10X. And so I think that there are definitely opportunities to be a little bit more creative and better utilize the balance sheet. And I think that's really good for insurance, right? Because we have large balance sheets, we've got capital that we can use. And so how can we use that to support sort of these bigger innovation bets?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there is probably many organizations across the ecosystem who have a bias to build. And that can sometimes, like you say, the example you gave before, build is the right path to market. But just as many times or more often than not, sometimes the partner or an investment or a buy is actually a far better option. I hadn't necessarily thought about it in a cost-constrained environment. That's a really good point around it's CapEx over OpEx. Is a really efficient way to utilize the, like you say, particularly in insurance where your balance sheet are quite strong, and deployment of capital is sought after from the organisation to keep up with claims inflation and whatnot. So maybe then, I guess we've been talking about your opinions on innovation and your experiences. I'm keen to dive in if you've got a particular unpopular opinion that might be against the grain of others in the innovation community. It could be around a trend, it could be around a technology, around a process, whatever it might be. Is there something that you kind of hold based on your experience and your opinions that might be quite different from others, peers of yours across other organisations, even inside your own organisation?
To be honest, there isn't. I've been racking my brain about this, thinking through what do I sort of have a unique point of view on that might be inconsistent with my peers. And to be honest, I've really struggled to come up with something. I think where I tend to have a different opinion is versus executive, like maybe sort of some of the the long held, I think, myths around innovation, or some of the beliefs that I think those who, despite wanting to champion innovation with the organization, they have some white held beliefs around how it should work and what it takes to be successful. So for example, and I've come across this 100 times, people read sort of a book on what Google did, or the two pizza teams at Amazon, or all this kind of stuff, and think that they can just throw 5 people from the organization into a room and they're going to create the next billion-dollar insurance idea or project. And I think that's really hard, because sometimes when you try to build a capability or you want to establish the role for innovation in your organization, while there might be the strategic intent there, sometimes that isn't always matched with the resource required to do that. Now, I mentioned before that innovation doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need millions and millions of dollars. But what it needs is a recognition that as you move through the journey, right, as you move from concept into scale, that it's not it's not something that the same 3 or 4 people with no innovation experience can just conjure up and do and execute on successfully and then scale it. You need to have an investment in the team. You need to have investment in the right resources, and you can certainly lean on subject expertise from across the business and those who have the right mindset and the right appetite to be involved. But it needs to be led by people who know what they're doing and who are trained in this, and it needs to be led by and it needs to be supported with the resource required to be successful, right? And I think that's certainly something I've come up against a lot in every organization, sort of, that I've not worked in necessarily, but certainly worked with or spoken to, and there's certainly this point of view that Jack can just take every second Friday and build the next Google, right? It's not going to happen. And so I think that's probably the one that bugs me the most, and I think that's something that always tends to be the biggest fight around getting that balance right between the strategic intent and what it is that you want to deliver, and just then being able to balance that at the right time with the appropriate resource, so that you've got every chance for success.
That's a great point, and very much aligned to a long-held belief I've had around one of the reasons many organisations don't do innovation well is quite often they will just mobilise a team, which is sometimes not even based on capability, it's just based on capacity.
Yeah.
Mobilise them around an idea. And well, one, I mean, there's a number of things that go wrong, but quite often it's I think it's an underappreciated skill and capability that is quite unique, and sometimes difficult to articulate what some of those skills are. And I think even within a product management discipline, I'll use that as an example. You can use design, you can use technology as other examples, but I'll use product management because that's what I'm most closely experienced with. Is there are 1,000 different product managers. So if you've got someone who is managing a Scrum team and they're managing a small part of the customer life cycle, let's say in insurance, they're managing the claims part of their journey, and making sure that they've optimized the experience of customers. So, and kind of enhancing that experience, one at a journey level, but also at a really micro level. Let's use a green button over an orange button. Let's, that's feature management, and that's really important. That's very user led and plays a critical role. And in scale organizations, that can have a massive impact. Compare that to an entrepreneur in residence type product manager. It is a very different mindset where you're actually trying to build capabilities. You're trying to find a successful business model. You've not only got to find something that resonates with consumers, you've got to find if it's something that can give you a competitive advantage, if it leverages your assets and capabilities, or builds, gives you the network effect. It's got a profitable business model and some underlying fundamentals and all of these kind of things. Very different disciplines, both titled this kind of product management. Management. I think that could apply across all streams of innovation capabilities.
Yeah,
you can't just put you can't just put a product manager as a product manager. You can't just put a designer as a designer. They've got to have some of those other really unique capabilities that come with innovation management.
Yeah, completely. And look, and you can't build it, to the counter to that too, you can't build it without that subject expertise from the business too.
Yes,
so you've got to really strike that balance. And I've seen things fail for both reasons, where it was built in a silo, absent of the true understanding of the customer need, right through to something that was just built without any of the expertise and sort of fell over quite quickly. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, final question is, I'm keen to understand your thoughts on the future of innovation in complex organizations and large enterprise. So what do you think the future holds for innovation systems, and what should leaders be preparing for?
I think, so I'll answer this from the context of an insurance company, right? Because I think from where I've had most of my, all of my innovation experience really is been in the contract of insurance and specifically P&C, property and casualty insurance. I think the global insurance industry is an absolute monster, right? So it's close, I think, to $8 trillion of revenue or premium. It's going to grow another $2 trillion over the next couple of years. And you'd probably say up until this point, it is not the fastest moving. It's not the most innovative industry, if you like, globally. I think, if you sort of cast our minds back to, I think about 2015, 2016, when we were working at IAG, that was sort of, I guess, the cusp of the first wave, if you like, of Insurtech, right? The messaging was all about disintermediation, disruption. It was very sort of consumer focused, and it was really about trying to make insurance more accessible, more digital, right, and effectively putting things online. And the narrative at the time was, watch out, you're going to have sort of this Uber moment or this Airbnb moment. And it never really happened. It sort of petered out a little bit. And I think fast forward sort of, I don't know, 5 years, you sort of then had the second wave that was starting to gather scale, which was really centered around collaboration, right? And incumbent insurance companies working with startups, working with technology companies, they started focusing in on much more complex problems, right? In more complex markets, addressing more complex needs. right? And I think, we're still in that wave now. And I think there's been some fantastic success stories of platforms and startups, be it MGAs, enterprise software, etc., that have really managed to, I guess, ride the venture wave a little bit, if you like, the ups and downs that we've gone through over the last couple of years, and come out the other side, close to break even, close to profitability, where they're now ready for the next stage of their journey, and the incumbents seem much more open. Their processes are better. As I said, that growth mindset's more prevalent, I think, across the industry. So we're at a really interesting place where there's still a ton of legacy that exists. It's still very difficult to replace, but I think the mindsets within the organisation and the appetite to innovate at the moment has got stronger. Momentum keeps growing. I think as I have a look at the last 18 months and just the advancements in AI, specifically generative AI. We've got breakthroughs recently in quantum computing. You've got breakthroughs in autonomous vehicles. You've got breakthrough in a number of technologies that even blockchain, you can say that sort of it's going to become more and more prevalent, I think, over the next few years in the insurance industry. You've got these technologies that I think are developing continue to develop at a rapid pace. And I think innovation in the insurance industry is now more important than ever. I think with AI in particular, I think at the moment, in the next couple of years, we're going to start to, see a real shift towards verticalization, vertical applications of AI specific for the insurance industry, specific for regulated industries. And that's not just consumer lines, direct to consumer pet insurance. It is, complex, syndicated London market risk, right? And I think that presents exciting opportunities. I think incumbents now are starting to experiment. Some incumbents are starting to move beyond experimentation into scale. I know from my personal experience, QBE have done that in a number of use cases across some product lines globally. We've got the technology providers and those startups who are at scale, who have a large customer base now thinking about, okay, how can we almost retrofit AI to improve our value proposition, right? Be that Guidewire or pricing company companies, or various other technology partners out there, Salesforce even, right? More broadly, like how can we start to apply this technology to improve our value prop? And we're seeing that now for insurance. But I think what's most exciting is in our lots of discussions we're having with really early stage companies, right? The companies that are being born right now. We are seeing the advent of truly AI native insurance, purpose-built insurance applications or startups. And I think over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, as they come and go and the successful ones scale, we're going to see a rate of change that I think is really, really exciting, really, really important, and I think has the potential to catch a lot of insurance companies, being brokers, reinsurers, MGAs, off guard. And so I think, to come back to your question, I think innovation is now more important than ever. I think companies need to have, through one mechanism or another, the ability to see around corners, right? The ability to stay ahead, cross this, the ability to experiment rapidly, understand what's hype and what's not, understand what's working, how they can bring that into their organization. Some of that will simply be to keep pace with the market. Others will see that as an opportunity to take step change and try and lead the market. And I think, we all want to be in that latter one. So I would say, or my advice would be, don't shy away from this. Don't be shutting your teams down and closing that. You need to be more sort of awake to this than ever.
Yeah, that's really good. I just got tingles as you said that. I'll leave it to the other insurance leaders who are listening to this to determine if they're ready for that future and what's coming. Before we wrap up, I want to give you the chance to talk a little bit about QBE Ventures. You've sort of, I guess, dropped it into many parts of the conversation. Maybe if you can just quickly tell us a little bit about QBE Ventures, who it is, what your kind of remit is, and if anyone does want to get in touch, how they can do so.
Yeah, of course. So we're the corporate venture arm of QBE. So our role is really to invest in, build alongside startups. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, you got to have a clear role within the organization. What allows us is really to look outside the organization, right? And bring companies in, expose the organization to new business models, to emerging technologies, which we feel can help accelerate the delivery of our strategic priorities. So we don't just do investments. I think there's certainly an assumption that anything with the name ventures in is purely limited to venture capital. We do that, but we sort of set ourselves up as multi-pronged, right? And our way of working, as I said before, is very collaborative. It's very much around working with the business to understand what the opportunities are, what the problems are, and then if there's an opportunity to partner and bring the company from the outside in, then we will do that. And further to that, there's an opportunity to actually, or a clear rationale as to, we should develop a much deeper strategic partnership with that startup. Maybe perhaps their technology can apply to numerous use cases across the business, or perhaps we can build something together. Whatever that might be, then we will certainly look at investment and forming a much deeper strategic partnership. So that's how we're set up within the organization. We've got a team of about 10 dotted across New York, the UK, and Sydney, Melbourne. And so we have a global mandate. As I said, we're really about servicing QBE. So that means insurance, reinsurance, and I think we have access to, or the ability to underwrite in certainly most regions of the world. So we have a great ability to be able to work with startups in a core market, and then be able to think with them, okay, how do you get to London, or how do you get to North America, or how do you get to Southeast Asia or Australia? How do we turn your technology from focusing on this piece to that piece, right? And so we sort of try to really champion an approach where the partnership is mutually beneficial. It's not just about consuming a service and investing to get a cheaper rate. It's about actually, we can do a lot together that is mutually beneficial to both parties. So how do we do that? And so that's what we prioritize. So that's us in a nutshell.
Excellent, thank you. And for anyone who does want to get in touch, what's the easiest way?
Yeah, just LinkedIn. If you james.orchard@qbe.com, nice easy one to remember. Reach out. We're sort of really open and always willing to have a discussion wherever you are in the world. So please feel free just to reach out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, James, very much for joining us today. Plenty to unpack. I've written down a page worth of notes here, and it's been very valuable, as I'm sure it will be for all of our listeners today. So yes, thanks again for joining us, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.